In echoing corridors of time, nations have risen and fallen on the tides of information. A voice, silenced or allowed to speak, has carried the weight of destinies. Today, I stand before you not just as a speaker, but as a herald of the truth that is slipping through our fingers, the indispensable freedom of the press. Freedom of the press isn't just about a journalist's right to speak and report. It's also about a society's right to hear, to know, and to grow. It's about holding power accountable, fostering dialogue, and ensuring that democracy isn't just a word in our textbooks, but a living and breathing entity. Let's pause for just a moment and think about what a free and independent press truly represents. It's the flashlight in the darkest recesses of governance. It's the voice that asks the hard questions, and it's the pen that records history even when others wish to rewrite it. But unfortunately, this beacon of truth has come under siege. If history has shown us anything, it's that empires, no matter how mighty, have moments of moral lapse. And yes, that includes the great old United States of America. The land of the free, where dreams are said to take flight, has its own share of shadows. And it's not treachery nor disloyalty to shed light upon these inequities. In fact, it's the very essence of patriotism. For how can one hope to rectify what one does not know is broken? It's not just a right, but a responsibility for the press to report on crimes or misdemeanors committed by any country, including, and most especially, their own. The press serves as society's conscience, reflecting both its light and its darkness. To prosecute journalists for unveiling these truths isn't just an attack on them. It's an attack on the very foundation of democracy. Because in the words of the great George Orwell, quote, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act," end quote. It's ironic, isn't it? The secrets that governments harbor, often in the name of national security, sometimes undermine the very essence of democratic values. When governments hide, under layers of paperwork and bureaucracy, actions that contradict the principles upon which a nation is founded, it is a disservice to every citizen, to every individual who believes in the promise of democracy. And right now, there's a dangerous precedent being set. Whistleblowers and journalists throughout the world, those brave souls who risk it all to bring truth to the fore, are increasingly under threat. The prosecution doesn't just endanger press freedom, it threatens the very fabric of our societies. If those who reveal overreach, corruption, or crimes are silenced, who then becomes the true threat to national security? Imagine a world where journalists tread in a perpetual state of fear, where the ink of truth dries up, replaced by watered-down narratives of appeasement and propaganda. That is a world where democracy's pulse grows faint, overshadowed by the looming specter of authoritarianism. Today's perilous state of press freedom isn't just a headline for tomorrow's paper. It's a clarion call to us all. It reminds us that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. We must guard with unwavering determination the sanctity of an independent press. For in press freedom lies the resilience of our democracy, the assurance of our rights, and the future of our shared dreams. We stand at a crossroads. Down one path lies a world where truth is the currency of power, where the press stands tall, unyielding in its commitment. Down the other lies a world muffled in silence, where truth is a rare commodity, traded in hushed whispers. Which world are we going to choose? The answer, my friend, doesn't just lay in the hands of journalists or whistleblowers. It lies with each one of us. In every article that we read, in every news piece that we share, in every voice that we amplify, and in every stand that we take for the truth. In a world buzzing with ceaseless chatter, it's easy to underestimate the power of a singular voice, the voice of truth. And if there's an institution emblematic of this voice, well, it is the free and independent press. I want you to envision a press that is not muzzled by fear nor favor. A press that dares to challenge, to question, and to prod at the very heart of society's accepted truths. But why, do you ask, is this important? Why should we care if a journalist somewhere raises a voice, or if an editor somewhere chooses to remain silent? Well, let's dive into the numbers, because often data paints a clearer picture than words alone can. The World Press Freedom Index, which ranks 180 countries on the basis of the freedom journalists have, shows a direct correlation between suppression of media freedom and the degradation of democratic values. In 2021, both Hungary and Poland, once considered stalwarts of European democracy, had slipped to 92nd and 64th positions, respectively. These falls are not just numbers, but indicators of a democracy in peril, with increasing governmental control and suppression of dissenting voices. Research from Freedom House reaffirms this. It shows that media independence is shrinking globally, with, and get this, only 13% of the world's population now having access to free press. 13%. In places where the press is not free, there's a ubiquitous decline in other democratic freedoms, everything from fair elections to public accountability. A report by the Committee to Protect Journalists highlighted that as of December 2020, 274 journalists were imprisoned worldwide, the highest number since the organization began its grim tally. Each number in that statistic is a voice silenced, a truth buried. And why is a free press that questions the official narrative so vital? Because history, time and again, has shown us the perils of a single, unchecked narrative. From the propaganda campaigns of autocratic regimes to the spin-driven narratives of modern politicians, the consequences of an unchallenged story, well, they can be both profound and quite perilous. The press, in its true essence, isn't just about reporting events. It's about connecting the dots, understanding the larger picture, and most importantly, questioning what is presented as fact. By questioning the status quo, the press serves as democracy's checkpoint and ensures that power remains where it should, in the hands of the people. However, when this press is silenced through prosecution, censorship, or intimidation, well, that's akin to pulling the curtains on the vigilant eyes of a society. We are left in the dark, grappling with shadows of misinformation and half-truths. To those who argue that a press that challenges authority might destabilize society, well, I would say this. A society that doesn't allow questions is already on shaky ground. For it's not the question that destabilizes, but the fear of what that question might reveal. We stand at a pivotal moment in history. The technological age has democratized information, but it has also amplified the tools to suppress it. It is in this dichotomy that the importance of a free and independent press becomes most paramount. So the next time you read an article, listen to a broadcast, or engage with news in any form, take a moment to appreciate the very freedom that allows these voices to rise, to question, and to keep democracy alive. For in the unwavering gaze of a free press lies a true reflection of a free society. And the annals of history, certain names rise not just as individuals, but as symbols, as echoes of a time and a testament to battles fought. And today, I am proud to speak of one such name, Julian Assange. To some, he is a provocateur. To others, like myself, he is a hero. But strip away the layers of bias and sentiment, and what remains is an undeniable truth. Julian Assange has been subjected to a campaign so brutal, so intent on silencing, that it brings into stark focus the very nature of freedom in the modern world. The founder of WikiLeaks embarked on a mission to unveil the concealed, the shadowy corridors of power, and the secrets that they housed. But in doing so, he made some formidable adversaries. His subsequent prosecution and years of confinement defy the very essence of constitutional protections and democratic ideals. This isn't just about one man. It's about what he represents, the freedom of the press. The First Amendment, a cornerstone of American democracy, guarantees freedom of speech and press, deeming them essential to a free state. Yet the harrowing treatment of Assange calls into question the state's commitment to these ideals. For if an individual can be prosecuted for unveiling the truth, what then remains of those freedoms? The case of Julian Assange is not just about one individual. It's a reflection of global values of how we treat those who unveil inconvenient truths. To fully grasp the gravity of a situation, it is imperative to examine the evidence presented by leading international institutions and their observations on his well-being and treatment. Take, for instance, reports from the United Nations and global health rights organizations on Assange's conditions, which are quite alarming. They paint a picture of psychological torture, of deteriorating health in the shadows of confinement, of rights trampled upon in a rush to set a most dangerous precedent. In May 2019, the United States rapporteur on torture, Niels Meltzer, visited Julian Assange in Belmarsh prison, accompanied by 2 medical experts. Now, their objective was to assess the extent of any potential psychological torture or mistreatment Assange might have suffered, and the findings were deeply troubling. According to Meltzer's statement, Mr. Assange showed all symptoms typical for prolonged exposure to psychological torture, including extreme stress, chronic anxiety, and intense psychological trauma. This wasn't just an assertion. It was a conclusion based on comprehensive assessments by medical professionals. Moreover, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention had already concluded back in 2015 that Assange's confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy in London was arbitrary. And they reaffirmed this position in 2018, stating that the situation had evolved into one of increasingly severe deprivation of liberty. From a broader perspective, Amnesty International, a global rights watchdog, constantly voiced concern over the U.S. extradition request. They emphasized that it could set a, quote, dangerous precedent, unquote, where journalists and whistleblowers could be penalized for publishing classified information of public interest. Furthermore, a 2020 study by the International Bar Association's Human Rights Institute expressed apprehensions over the potential implications of Assange's extradition and trial. They stressed that his prosecution would endanger journalism worldwide, potentially criminalizing essential journalistic activities. The report also drew attention to conditions under which Assange might be detained in the U.S., pointing to potential violations of his human rights, considering the long periods of solitary confinement he most certainly faces. All of these reports and studies converge on a critical juncture. The treatment of Julian Assange isn't just about his individual rights, but it speaks to a larger global concern. The precedent set by his prosecution and potential extradition cast a long shadow over the pillars of democracy and press freedoms. When international institutions like the United Nations, recognized authorities and upholding human rights standards, ring alarm bells, it isn't merely a procedural concern. It's a clarion call, signaling that the foundational values that we all cherish are at great risk. Assange's deteriorating health, his psychological trauma, and the potential implications for press freedom together paint a dire picture. They underline the urgent need for transparent, equitable, and just proceedings, anchored in international human rights standards. Only then can we truly uphold the principles of justice, freedom, and democratic values that we hold dear. The prosecution of Julian Assange is a chilling signal to journalists worldwide. For if he can be tried and punished for publishing classified information, then what stops the prosecution of other journalists or whistleblowers who might do the same? Where do we draw the line between national security and the public's right to know? And if truth becomes a threat, who then decides the narrative? These dangers are not hypothetical. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, as of 2020, a record number of journalists are in prison globally. Their crime? Well, often is just doing their job, bringing stories to the forefront. In the shadow of Assange's ordeal, every one of these cases takes on a deeper, more sinister hue. Freedom of speech isn't just about the right to speak. It's about the right to be heard. And the freedom of the press isn't just about publishing. It's about ensuring that societies remain informed, even if truth happens to be inconvenient or uncomfortable. We must ask ourselves difficult questions. Is our commitment to democracy, to freedom, only as deep as it is convenient? Do we champion these values universally, or do they waver, bending to the whims of power and politics? Julian Assange's plight is more than a personal saga. It's a litmus test for our age. It's a mirror held up to societies, reflecting how they treat those who dare to question, to challenge, and to unveil. In his story, we find not just the tale of one man, but the story of us all, of what we stand for, what we accept, and the kind of world we wish to inhabit. In rallying behind the principles that Assange's case represents, we are not just defending an individual, but the very pillars of our free society. For in the darkness that seeks to engulf the truth, it is the light of collective conscience that must shine the brightest. And that, my friends, is the final word up front. I'm Sean St. Hart, and you're listening to, or maybe watching, Coup Save America, a radio program and podcast that strives to separate truth from misinformation. And today, I am honored to introduce our guest, Kim Stanton. He is the founder and director of Films for Change. Kim is here to tell us about his inspiring project and about the production of his own first documentary movie aimed to reveal the hidden truths within our unjust world. Kim's award-winning documentary, The Trust Fall, Julian Assange, examines the meaning and significance of the insights that WikiLeaks shared with the world, the resulting behavior of the governments involved, the extraordinary personal risks taken by Assange, and the wider fundamental issues around press freedom that affect all of us in our right to know. And Kim joins us from Australia in just a few minutes. Right now, we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Coup Save America. Coup Save America. Podcast you need every week. What you will do for latest news. Understand economy and politics. This is Coup Save America.
And welcome back. And joining us now from Australia is the producer and director and writer of the feature film Trust Fall, Julian Assange. Kim Stanton joins us right now. Hello, sir.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you. So I watched the documentary last night. Wow. Very powerful. For those that are not familiar with Julian Assange, can you kind of give us just a little bit of a intro to why it's so important that you made this film and why people need to see it?
Sure. So Julian Assange is a journalist and publisher from Australia. He is currently being detained at Belmarsh Prison in London, United Kingdom. He's been detained there for more than 4 years on an extradition request from the US to the UK. So he's being indicted under the Espionage Act of 1917 under 18 counts, which is relating to his publishing of the Iraq war logs and Afghan war logs in 2010, the Guantanamo Bay disclosures and the Cablegate disclosure, all in that year of 2010. So he's been arbitrarily detained for more than 12 years in one form or another. And there is huge calls, a growing uproar and calls for his release from world leaders. From there's a weak kind of call for his release from the Australian government. We can go more into that, I guess, in more detail later. But you have dozens of human rights and free speech groups calling for his release, and supporters worldwide.
Yeah, one of the things that did surprise me a bit that I learned in the documentary, and I was under a different impression, was the support from actually the government of Australia. And what I learned was that there's not adequate support coming from Australia whatsoever.
Well, there's been, just with this current government, the government under Anthony Albanese, for the first time we do see a slight change in the stance. So the line of this current government is enough is enough, and
Right.
a very cryptic kind of weasel words kind of statement. It's hard to even comprehend what they mean exactly. It can kind of be easily interpreted as almost implying by default that the time spent was somehow sufficient and appropriate. But many people don't agree. I certainly don't agree with that he shouldn't have spent 1 hour in prison at all.
Agreed.
But it is significant in that the prior governments, the 6 or 7 governments prior, after Julia Gillard, Gillard commenced the official sort of Australian persecution of Julian Assange, and then every Australian government since then has been just at the behest of the United States and basically doing whatever they're told to do, and continuing to just follow suit with this extradition request.
You know, I have to apologize to the world for the United States, the empire that we have and the control that we have over so many other countries. I mean, when we talk about sovereignty, sovereignty with conditions, right? We don't have any respect for the laws of other countries. We don't even respect the laws of our own countries. I mean, we do pretty much whatever we want. And I think Julian Assange is someone who is a hero. And the crime he committed, I mean, he obviously committed a crime. His crime was telling the truth and revealing secrets that the world did not want put out there. And in the video, it was interesting. I forget who it was in the video, the movie. And again, the movie is Trust Fall, Julian Assange. Was that it wasn't so much the documents that bothered the CIA, it was the video. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're referring to the collateral murder video,
right?
Which is an incredibly harrowing, just a horror movie to watch, and but it's real, and that's capturing the Apache helicopter attack in New Baghdad, Iraq during the Iraq War. The video, when it was finally released by WikiLeaks, it went viral. It was all over the news. It went viral on social media, and it's really one of the most shocking, violent, and revealing videos ever seen of modern war, and yeah, it's so revealing of the brutality of modern warfare, this imperialist warfare, where you have one side being vastly more powerful and more and have much stronger weaponry. So essentially, in this event, we had American Apache helicopter flying over New Baghdad, looking for perceived threats. Identifying 12 men walking down the street, assuming that they were carrying weapons. And when they found the right time, the right moment, they just mowed them down with a rain of bullets. And then it was later revealed that the men, and that was revealed, I believe, through the WikiLeaks disclosure. At the time, the soldiers didn't realize that two of the men were in fact carrying cameras. They were journalists. They were 2 Reuters journalists carrying cameras, going about their work, and the rest of the men were unarmed, and they were basically walking down the street having a chat and going about their daily business. So there was no engagement. The civilians didn't shoot anyone or fire any bullets. They were shooting with cameras, and they were shot down. So it's a clear case of the collateral impact of war, and then there was nothing done. That's the key part of it. And there's no justice for these victims. And also this incident has 2 parts. So let me just quickly describe the second part. So after the 12 people are shot dead on the ground, there's one man that's still moving around, and he's crawling on the street in his own blood. And then someone comes along in a van. Another civilian comes along, a good Samaritan, and he hops out of the van and tries to help the man, as you would, as any decent person would. Tries to help him into the van to take him to the hospital, obviously, and then the Apache helicopter, the U.S. helicopter, shoots 150 rounds or something into the van, and the van is carrying two children, the man's two children, who are also seriously injured. This is just murder. It's straight out murder. They tried to hide behind this sort of rules of engagement concept, and the Reuters journalists who covered the story, some of the rest of the Reuters journalist team in Baghdad, they heard about the incident at the time, July 2007. They heard about what had happened. They investigated it, and the US Army attempted to cover it up. And so it was years later before someone within the US Army, Chelsea Manning, at the time Bradley Manning, so she had access to this material, passed it through to WikiLeaks through their anonymous Dropbox, and WikiLeaks then published it, and that allowed the world to understand this war crime and be aware of it. But yet here we are, 2023, no justice for the victims. Nothing has happened. No kind of action has been taken against those that committed the crime. No compensation for the widow or the children who were victims of it. And it's up to people that are aware of it to share it out there, and that's something that we wanted to include in the film as a very powerful example of what WikiLeaks has disclosed, and also as an example of the retaliation of the United States against WikiLeaks. This is the source of their embarrassment and their anger and their revenge upon the messenger. This is basically a case of shooting the messenger to warn off other whistleblowers. Don't expose our dirty laundry, or we'll come after you and we'll crush you.
Yeah, and with watching the condition of Julian Assange, I mean, they have succeeded in assassinating him in a sense, because how can he emerge? I mean, we're talking about psychological torture. I would even argue physical torture, deprivation of liberty, deprivation of freedom, deprivation of health care. He's been in solitary confinement this entire time at a high maximum security prison for telling the truth. I mean, even if we say, okay, the United States government is 100% correct in everything, he is accused of hacking into a system, which is not true whatsoever. But even if that were true, even if he had hacked into the system, the consequences that he is facing do not whatsoever reach the degree to which he is the crimes that he is charged with. So this is obviously retaliation. This is obviously, and they've smeared him endlessly. Here in the United States, people blame Julian Assange for Donald Trump. Has the mission been accomplished? I mean, what journalist and whistleblower, to even consider what Julian Assange has done?
Yeah, well, you make some good points there, Sean, and he's certainly been, brought to the edge of death, really, by the treatment, by the persecution, by the torture, the psychological torture. his health has suffered incredibly. I can just pass on not my own observations, but what's known from his family members of recent visits. He's, I mean, we've had this terrible occurrence that he's had a mini stroke during his extradition trial. Roughly, that was roughly 9 months ago. So now his left
and they try
eyelid.
to cover that up.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything like that is not, the mainstream media don't really cover it. You'll see little articles, but yeah, he didn't receive proper treatment. His left eyelid is drooping, so he looks like he's about to wink. He has, suffered incredibly psychological torture. So of course, his mental state is not good. He goes through really dark patches where he's really unhappy, this is typical of someone that's in solitary confinement, which in itself is a type of torture, all the isolation and the deprivation of it, and then being in Belmarsh prison amongst the worst criminals of the United Kingdom. Here you have a journalist amongst these criminals. It's not a safe environment. It's not a pleasant environment. So he's really up against it. And the only way the only reason it continues is because of lack of awareness. Hence this film, and people need to speak up. We can't, they can just continue to get away with this because people either don't know or don't really care. And as far as the chilling effect on journalism, well, I'm sure that's evident already. It's so rare that you see any whistleblowing activity going on. Surely journalists that are refusing to cover certain stories and not following certain leads of things that they should be covering and ideally and revealing to the public, they're too scared to cover them because of Assange. What might happen to them. So, journalists really need to protect their own industry and their own livelihoods by speaking up against this.
And I'm not asking you for, I'm sure you're probably not aware of all the legalities involved in the extradition. But my understanding, my confusion is, how can we charge him with espionage when he's not even a U.S. citizen?
Yeah, well, I can just comment general statements. Not a lawyer, but just what's common knowledge amongst people that are involved with investigating the case and covering this story. So he's charged under this antiquated Espionage Act from 1917. It's the same act that we have currently Donald Trump being charged, ironically, and Daniel Ellsburg, the legendary whistleblower from the Pentagon Papers, 1973 during the Vietnam War, and many others have been charged under the Espionage Act. But the thing about this Espionage Act, it was designed during World War II to protect the United States against spies. It's so in 1973 you had an American citizen, Daniel Ellsberg, who was actually working for the US government, and he served in Vietnam, and so he was just a genuine whistleblower, revealing information, and they charged him under the act, which was unprecedented at the time. He was the first American citizen to be charged under the act, so there was already an misappropriation of the act. And then here we are 50 years later, and you have a man who is not an American citizen, not a whistleblower. Most people would describe him as a publisher journalist because he's not the one that has immediate access to the information. He's just simply passing it on, as I said, a messenger of information. So not a US citizen, wasn't in America at the time, and so it's not only that they are just vastly misappropriating this Espionage Act, but also there's an extraterritorial behavior here that we're witnessing, where you have one country going into another country and plucking someone, requesting to pluck that citizen of Australia out of London and bring them to the United States to charge them under an act that was intended for spies. So the whole thing is a fraud. It's laughable if it wasn't so serious and awful and shocking. It's just abusive. It's basically very clearly fraudulent and designed to just to scare off whistleblowers and their publishers.
Well, it's really an act of war against a man, is really what this is. And, you know, this, a common rhetoric that we hear in the United States around whoever, anytime there's a whistleblower that comes out, it's, well, they jeopardize national security and they put lives at risk. And my argument to that is always, so what? If the government is committing a crime, the people have a right to know about that crime. And if it puts people's lives at risk, those people knew those risks when they committed those crimes, when they engaged in that activity. The right
really
to know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, there's a really interesting counter question to that is, should a crime be classified? I think there's a sort of a knee-jerk reaction of the public whenever we see these stories about whistleblowers. I mean, even the term whistleblower, it's not something we hear very often. So we might tend to kind of get defensive or anxious when we hear this word whistleblower, classified information. It's just so easy for the mainstream media to just paint these kinds of to paint whistleblowers as somehow as an enemy, a traitor, or traitors and dissidents, and which they are, but you know, so, that they're doing something rebellious and you know, naughty in a way, but that's taken away from what is the material, like what is it that they are revealing. If it's a crime, then the question should be, well, should a crime be classified? Should we be hiding crimes? And I do remember that John Kiriakou, another whistleblower from the United States who served time in prison, he said in a recent speech in Sydney, Australia, he said that it's illegal in the US to classify a crime. I've asked a few lawyers since then. I'm really curious about, is that accurate? How accurate is that? But in essence, I mean, from a big perspective, it seems like that's how it should be. It should be that crimes shouldn't be classified. Classification is just hiding something.
Yeah.
And this is in many interviews that I've watched with Julian Assange, he has talked about transparency. There's a quote from him from an interview that he did while he was under house arrest in the UK. It must have been 2010 or 2011. He said, "Transparency is for governments and privacy is for individuals." End quote. That, I mean, it really hits the nail on the head. And here we have in this current age less and less privacy. That's what was revealed through the Vault 7 disclosure. That the US government is spying on its own citizens, anyone that they suspect of being somehow related through, you know, a chain of maybe 10 other people, somehow distantly related to someone that might be, you know, remotely accused or related to someone who might allegedly have been involved with someone else who happened to be suspected of terrorism. You know, it's like, you know, which was a crime against the American people. to do that, to surveil through smartphones and through laptops. It's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, look it up. Spend 5 minutes and you'll find out it's not. So in this modern age, we have less and less privacy. We have social media collecting our data, selling it off. We have CCTV cameras everywhere, CCTV. They're always finding more and more ways to monitor us and see what we're up to. And then there's less and less transparency for the governments, and there's this sense of people are not aware that we forget that the governments work for us. They're there
Right.
to serve, and not to watch over us and have complete control over our daily lives. So that was one of the concepts behind WikiLeaks, was this mission to bring more information to the people, down to the people, down to the masses, and give us more understanding of how the world works and how governments and the powerful elite are operating. And they did that. They successfully achieved that, despite the persecution of Julian and what he's suffered. WikiLeaks has covered, since 2006, really valuable information from more than 200 countries. Like virtually every country of the world has been exposed through the disclosures. And what the other side of this incredible innovation of WikiLeaks is, apart from the anonymous Dropbox and the protection of whistleblowers, is the website itself. It's no typical website. This website can't be erased. It can be hacked, of course, but then Assange and his team very cleverly came up with ways to protect the information. So essentially, I mean, it gets very technical at this point, and I can't completely wrap my head around it. I'm not a tech person or a encryption expert by any stretch. I'm completely lost. But my basic understanding of it is that there's multiple copies of all of these leaks, and we're talking 10 million documents, multiple copies held by various people around the world. And if the website gets hacked, which it regularly does, because they have no shortage of enemies amongst the powerful countries, if the website is hacked and goes down, it just pops up 1 or 2 days later from another server. So it's a very clever website, and in essence, it's a library that can't be destroyed or erased. So and it's really important to note that the WikiLeaks resource is being used and as a resource by scholars, universities, in legal cases, by journalists. It's being used because it's valuable information. We're not talking about like Hollywood gossip or people's private information. It's information about crimes. That's what it is. That's what we're looking at here: crimes, corruption, environmental crimes, genocide, war crimes. That's what WikiLeaks is, and we should have this information, and we should be focusing on doing something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I think, one of the most shocking things to me is the lack of consequences for anyone that's been involved in actually committing these crimes, while the person who exposed the crime, we're going to punish them. I mean, whether it's Chelsea Manning or Edward Snowden or Julian Assange. I mean, all of them revealed crimes. In Edward Snowden's case, he revealed something that was entirely unconstitutional. The Supreme Court agreed that it was unconstitutional. And this argument that, well, he should have gone through proper channels. Yeah, those proper channels are the criminals. So absolutely we need WikiLeaks. And by the way, what's most striking is the New York Times and I believe the Washington Post published Julian Assange's work, the same work for which the United States is trying to basically bring him up on these bogus charges.
Yeah. In 2010, which was the height of the impact of the WikiLeaks disclosures. You had over that time, the 4 years from 2006 to 2010, where WikiLeaks was founded and then rapidly became prominent and influential. By 2010, they had many media partners, including these biggest newspapers, New York Times, Washington Post, Der Spiegel, Lament, and various other newspapers, massive media outlets, were partnering and benefiting from the associated sales of their newspapers because of the value of these releases. And so you had many journalists involved with disseminating the information, going through it, and finding the stories in amongst the masses of data, and then printing it and putting it on the front pages. And this is what really freaked out these tiny minority of warmongers and arms dealers and corrupt politicians, is that, oh, we can't do things surreptitiously anymore and get away with it. Now we have a highly effective, highly productive, prolific publisher and this innovative website and anonymous Dropbox innovation, which is completely going to get in the way of our unabated criminal activities. And so the newspapers benefited greatly, but then as soon as Julian under the bus, they all just ran for the hills and changed their tune, especially the Guardian in the UK. Now, thankfully, I have to acknowledge that a lot of these newspapers have finally, better late than never, started to pipe up and defend Julian Assange in a small way, with sort of public letters and articles that are actually starting to be on the right side of history in the way that they're supporting Julian Assange and standing up for their own industry and standing up for free speech and a free press. So we're seeing a shift there, but they should have from day dot just been extremely vocal. It should have been an incredible response on their part. So I just hope that they feel guilty. And I'll tell you something that's really quite comical and ironic, is that now we have you have these journalists, so-called journalists, standard sort of media hack journalists who pretty much just print out government handouts, and they're too weak and fearful to defend Julian in those early times when he was starting to be persecuted. And then now we have, just in the last a few years, you have AI starting to replace them, which is kind of comical. I mean, it's basically showing that, well, if you can't write of anything of substance and do a good job, well, then you're going to be replaced by a robot. Whereas the work of Julian Assange and WikiLeaks can never be replaced, and it took journalism to a new level of innovation, a new level of accuracy. WikiLeaks has never had to retract a story, unlike your typical newspaper has to retract stories every day or every week. They've never been questioned about the accuracy because they did their due diligence and they got information direct from the source, instead of working on rumors and conjecture. So that's a really important aspect of WikiLeaks disclosures, is they're 100% accurate.
Absolutely. And yeah, no, I was going to mention the fact that they had never had to retract any of the statements that they've made, any of the reports that they've made. And one of the things that your movie, and I want to remind people that we're talking to Kim Stanton, the director of The Trust Fall, Julian Assange. Wonderful movie. One of the things I want the audience to understand is that this is not just a movie about Julian Assange. This is a movie about the fundamental structures of society and how fragile they are right now. Because you mentioned in the movie, this is a film and this is a crisis that is facing democracy itself, freedom of press, freedom of speech. I mean, if they can do this to Julian Assange, then they can do this to any journalist anywhere in the world. And the message that's being sent is, if you go up against power, there will be consequences. And that's one of the brilliant things about your film, is that you've sent that message so clearly, that this is not just about Julian Assange. Yeah, that's an injustice that we need to correct. But the greater threat here, and this is probably why journalists have started to come to Julian's defense, it's because they realize that they too could easily fall under the same type of boot that Julian Assange is facing.
Yeah, that's a great point, and Sean. And this is the reason why everyone has to be looking into this Julian Assange situation, looking past the smear and the lies and the false narrative and getting to the heart of it. Not looking at the exterior, but looking at what's in the box. What are the disclosures? Why are they going after him? What is this information? And when you look at that, then you realize, well, this whole situation is a canary in the coal mine for the states of the state of our democracy, not just in the US, but in the particularly the Western world, but the entire world. I mean, of course, you have in various countries different levels of censorship and press freedom. The Reporters Without Borders, which we briefly touch on in the film, has a index of press freedom that they update every year. And one of the facts that Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders stated in the film is that at the time there's more than 500 journalists currently being detained or imprisoned in the world. And this is not just in so-called dictatorship countries. So that's one aspect, is free speech, free press, the First Amendment. It's all clearly in jeopardy by this Assange precedent, by the shocking precedent that it represents. But to me personally, the strongest aspect of this is about world peace.
Yes.
Everyone on the planet, 99.999%, roughly, of people on the planet want world peace. It doesn't matter what country you're in. And that tiny minority that don't want world peace just have something to benefit, something to gain from it. They're selling weapons, or they're creating havoc for political gain, or to get some sort of upper hand on their political opponent at the enormous, horrific detriment of the rest of us. It's just, in my short life, I just have never got my head around why we can't have a peaceful world. And you have to realize that, most of the WikiLeaks disclosures were related to war. So we have to address these huge issues that affect all of us. And it starts with transparency, with access to information, with realizing that we are worthy of knowing what's going on, what governments are doing in our name with our dollars, without us knowing. We're not the little people. We are the majority. They're the minority, and they should be doing our bidding because we're the people. That's what a democracy is meant to be. And information is central to that, to know what's going on in order that we can address it and start to make improvements.
Well, and a big part of that too is these people, Julian Assange is one of them, that have the courage to actually confront power. We as citizens of the world have a duty to pay attention to the information that is coming out and not to allow these personal smears. I mean, again, who cares who the messenger is? It's the message that's important. And unfortunately, again, as we talked about earlier, there does not seem to have been any consequences or any significant changes in the way power abuses the privilege that we entrust them with.
Yeah, no change, and in fact, things seem to be getting worse.
Worse, yeah.
The treatment of Julian Assange and Snowden and Chelsea Manning is, and various other whistleblowers, is just one example of the decline in the Western world of our rights and our freedoms, and this sort of progressive, fast sort of highway that we're on towards a more totalitarian world. The surveillance, the censorship of information, the lack of information, the silencing of dissident voices, and then this encroaching technology, threatening to sort of reduce our freedoms even more, and which it gets really complex when you look into all of this. But what you only have to look at, like, how am I living today, and what are our lives like now, and what were they like 10 or 20 years ago, and then we see that we live in a less democratic world.
Mm-hmm.
The economic situation is worse, and there's just less sense of empowerment in relation to access to information, and to sort of feel like the governments are accountable and that they're doing the right thing. There's just this sense of things kind of getting worse, and less transparency, less truth in the world, and less
Well,
peace.
a lot of that too goes to, and we talked about this earlier, the surveillance state that we have surrounding us. I mean, technology is finding new ways to surveil us. They're now talking about doing digital passports and digital IDs and digital currencies. And the scary part, well, the Orwellian part about all of that is, let's say that someone does, we had these policies like digital currency during Julian Assange. Well, we already know what they did with actual currency with him. For the first time, I think, in history, all of the credit card companies basically blocked any donations to WikiLeaks. I mean, talk about authoritarianism. You start to do digital currency, they could have just said, hey, Julian Assange's account, empty. You don't have access to it. We've taken all of the money that you've ever made.
Yeah.
So, things are getting worse, I think.
Yeah, you can just find many signs if you look at different aspects of modern life. You see that things are not improving; they're worsening. Although I suppose you could say that in some developing countries the situation is improving a little bit, but
right.
I mean, we don't need poverty, and we don't need homeless people. In every city, in wealthy countries. Where I live in Northern Rivers area, northern New South Wales, we had a catastrophic flood here, and you got people still living in their cars and tents. And meanwhile, Australian government just bought billions of dollars worth of submarines from the US. I mean, we start to go off on different tangents, but yeah, it's all linked together, and it all comes back to Julian Assange is a great example of the decline of democracy and the decline of press freedom.
Yeah. Do you think, well, one of the things that was mentioned in the film was that Julian Assange foresaw all of this happening. He was well aware of the consequences, and he did it anyhow. And that, to me, is one sign that the world is improving, in the sense that we do have WikiLeaks now. We do have people like Julian Assange, and someone else is going to rise up as well. There's always going to be people that come in a moment of despair and emerge as heroes. And unfortunately, those people are the ones that we're going to persecute and prosecute. I think
well,
that...
I like your optimism there. I think people would be. I think it took someone incredibly gifted and incredibly driven and idealistic as Julian Assange is, to really innovate and to make an impact and to become a spanner in the works of this machine of the modern world. And he was very ahead of his time in these innovations. And nowadays you have a lot of these media outlets have an anonymous Dropbox, so they've just copied that idea. But at the time, it was so brilliant, and he was well aware of the encroachment upon our freedoms, our privacy, and the threat that the internet posed if it was done the wrong way, which it definitely has been if it was sort of infiltrated by corporations and governments. And because the internet, he was very on top of the development of the internet when it first sort of came into Australia. He was really involved in that, and he was working as an encryption expert. He was making software and very successful with that. But this idea of WikiLeaks was to create a flow of information to the people, and by protecting whistleblowers. A simple idea, but it took a lot of clever coding and clever strategy to make it actually work, and we've just benefited from that. Whether you know it or not, if you can't think of one WikiLeaks disclosure, that's okay. It's never too late to go have a look, and that's what we've tried to do in this film, is to